wonderful to see so many who have traveled from the 5th District of Massachusetts to come here on this glorious day in Washington. And as I've been out saying hello, you know, we have people from so many communities, so many aspects of life in the district.
You just slide this on the podium, so on the top.
Okay.
See where the microphone is? Yeah.
You just love politics and want to come to Washington to learn what we're doing from the banking world, from the hospital world, from the publishing world. I probably just touched a little piece of it, but it's great to have you all here. As you know, this is an event that was started by Congressman Marty Meehan. This is our 18th 5th District Day, but it will also be our last 5th District Day because, as you probably know, with redistricting, we are going to go from the fighting 5th to we'll have a contest about what kind of 3rd district we're going to be. So it's of all the things that change with redistricting, I have to say that losing the 5th district title has been one of the more difficult ones to absorb. But it's great to see as well those we've absorbed, we will be absorbing if I earn the right to represent the new communities, 11 new communities, and it's also great to see folks who have come from some of those new communities here as well. So again, I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy lives to come to Washington and participate in this 18th day. What I want to do is introduce our staff. This kind of day cannot be put together without the extraordinary staff that I feel so fortunate to have. And just to give you, help you know who they are, I think I'll introduce them. First of all, we have Katie Enos, who's our Chief of Staff, has been our Chief of Staff since I first arrived in Washington. She's in back. John Noble, who's our Communications Director, standing in back as well. Every time you see a press release or an e-newsletter or a statement that I make to the press, John is front and center in helping to put that together. Sarah Christofferson, who's our Legislative Director, and now I'm focusing on our Washington staff. She oversees all the staff who help me analyze every piece of legislation that's introduced to the House that we are asked to vote on, help put together the laws that I want to introduce, and then she has her own topics of interest that include the federal budget, not a simple one, our taxes, again, not a simple one, small businesses and all the activities that relate to that. Is Nate in the room? Nathan Bell in the back is a legislative assistant to me. I serve on the Armed Services Committee, feel very fortunate that I do, and Nate is the staff person who helps me with all the work that the Armed Services Committee does. We just went last week through what we call the markup of the Defense Authorization Bill. It started at 10 in the morning and it concluded at 2:30 the following morning. So Nate helped me craft the pieces of legislation that are absorbed into that we felt were important to do, but also maintained a tight focus and a tight eye on everything else that bill was dealing with. So fortunate to have him. He also works on intelligence matters and trade matters as well. Sarah Alderson is in back, who again, a legislative assistant who works on health affairs, education, civil rights, and some of the issues that specifically affect women whatever category they may fall into. Derek Torrey in back. I am on the Natural Resources Committee, and Derek is my liaison, my legislative assistant, who helps monitor, again, all the legislation that committee considers as well, so in energy, environment, and transportation matters. I have been fortunate to get congressional fellows every year out of the military, and they have brought invaluable insight to our office as to the ways in which the various services work. And this year we have Major Christy Orser. Is Christy here?
Escorting the general here.
Who is escorting our general here. Great. And Becky Cairns, our legislative assistant in back. Becky has been an intern, a volunteer, a staff person in Lowell, and now has made her way here, where she oversees a legislative correspondent. I get thousands of letters in any given month, and we have to answer every one of those letters. Sometimes it's one letter about a particular issue. Sometimes it's a letter, you know, an issue that 1,000 people have written in about. But Becky has the unenviable job of helping to put together my response to those letters. And we review it all and vet it all, and it's reflective of, you know, my views, but it's not a simple task. So Becky is now doing that. Kristen Hagan in back, who is my scheduler and an executive assistant. So if any of you have ever wanted to try to have me come to an event, all of that goes through Kristen here in Washington, working with our staff back in the district. And then George Eng, who's our staff assistant. I don't know that George is here yet, but a recent arrival with deep, deep 5th District roots, raised in Lowell, Massachusetts. So great to have George. I have 3 district offices, just so you know, one in Lowell, one in Lawrence, one in Acton, and we have a staff member, Denise Johnson, who holds office hours every week at the Haverhill Citizen Center. You know, one of the commitments I made was that we would be very accessible to our constituents and be able to be responsive to particular needs of individuals, of businesses, of the community at large. And to do that, we have physical locations where our staff are, as well as the office hours that we do in Haverhill. And we have a few of our district staff people here with us today that I wanted to introduce. I'm sure many of you know Brian Martin, who's our district director and senior advisor, who works primarily out of the Lowell office. Chris Mullen, who's district manager, works primarily out of the Lowell, and he's walking up and down here making sure everything works. June Black, where's June? And back here, constituent services director and also my regional director in Lawrence. And prior to working with our office, spent a good number of years working with Marty, knows the district very well. And Amy Greenwood, in back as well, constituent services representative who works out of the Lowell office. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the day. You have, I think, in your packets, the schedule of the various speakers. There will be likely some changes because the nature of the day always is very dynamic here. Just yesterday we considered the Violence Against Women Act, a very, very important piece of legislation. It was crafted by our now Vice President, Joe Biden. Very, very successful effort in addressing and lowering the incidence of violence against women. Has been reauthorized several times because of its great success on a bipartisan basis. And it came to the floor yesterday in a form, however, that I could not support. The Senate had produced a version that I found very acceptable, but the version that came to the floor yesterday was not one that I could support because it basically carved out groups of women who did not have access to the various provisions of the bill, and I felt that that was not tenable. So nevertheless, that bill was on the floor yesterday. It will now go to conference, and hopefully the provisions that I could not support will be taken out so that it will come to us in a form that is supportable. The National Defense Authorization Act is on the floor today. And what that means, among other things, is that I will probably have to absent myself at periodic times if we have votes on amendments or whatever that may come up. But it's the only bill that the House Armed Services Committee produces every year. It encompasses the whole array of issues that we have to deal with through the Defense Department and for our military, whether it's about how we protect the soldier, the kind of weapon systems that we need to have in place in order to protect our country, policy statements around very important issues. So all this comes out in one piece of legislation. I'm proud this year that it includes some things that we've worked very hard on. When I say I mean we, because again, it's a staff effort. But also, it's fortunate to be the one committee that remains very bipartisan in its tone. We may have differences on some of these issues, but at the end of the day, we know that as we have an obligation to protect this country and to protect those who serve in our behalf. And as a result, despite all that you see about the differences here in Washington, we're able to get a lot of things done. So that bill includes some very important language around creating lighter weight body armor for our soldiers. As I came to Washington, I learned that we've done a remarkable job in creating body armor that is very protective, but as it protects, it is very, very heavy. It can weigh about 40 pounds in and of itself, and when you add on everything else a soldier has to carry, they're often carrying up to 120 pounds. So we want to be sure that the Defense Department remain very focused on research and development efforts to lighten body armor, and there's language that there's a tripling of the funding in the Defense Authorization Bill that for research and development that will seek to do just that. Women comprise about 15% of the military today. There's an estimate that by 2025 there'll be 25% of the military. The body armor is not crafted, is not women specific. So we are engaged in an effort to encourage the Defense Department to begin to develop body armor that better suits female bodies. And there's language in the bill that would do that. The issue of sexual assault is an egregious one. 1 out of 3 returning veterans, female veterans report having been the victim of some sort of military sexual trauma. It is not an issue that affects only women. It affects men serving in the military as well. You may well hear from General Odierno about the Army's efforts to really deal with this issue. Our Secretary of Defense has become very focused on it, recognized that this is an issue, despite all the good intentions, that has not gone away, and we see some very positive efforts now to truly, in a very substantive way, begin to change those numbers. I went to an event 2 weeks ago that was held by the Service Women's Action Network, and it was filled with women who had been subjected to it. It was a room bigger than this, filled with women who had been assaulted while serving, seeking to protect our country. We have got to change this, and so this bill has some great language. We're all following the BRAC process and fighting the good fight. We've got some very important installations in Massachusetts, and we want to do everything there. It's a unique synergy that takes place in Massachusetts between the research development efforts that happen on our bases, the constellation of research and development facilities that are nearby, the universities, the private sector companies that are fully engaged in all the new innovations to better protect our soldiers as well as better protect our country. And we have some great language in the bill that in particular highlights Hanscom and says, we're going to have a big discussion here, but it has to, whatever happens to Hanscom has to be part of the BRAC process and not the overall budgeting process. And we have, but this bill is not without its controversy. It's got $4 billion more than even the president asked for. So a lot of challenges here, and something that the debate will go on as we debate this bill on the floor today. And we're in a bit of a budget crisis, we all know that, but I see that our first guest is here. So I am very proud to welcome our first guest. This is General Raymond Odierno. I have had the great pleasure of working with this fine general in my role as a member of the Armed Services Committee. He became the 38th Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army last September. During his more than 35-year tenure with the Army, he has commanded units at every echelon from platoon to theater, with duty in Germany, Albania, Kuwait, Iraq, and the United States. Most recently, he led our troops in Iraq and also commanded the United States Joint Forces Command, where I was fortunate to meet him in 2009 as I made my second trip to Iraq. In this instance, I was the lead of a congressional delegation, and I will forever remember as we met with him. I was traveling with a congressman from Colorado who had been elected to Congress just in that past November 2008. But as he was elected as the first openly gay member of Congress. We have had others, obviously, who have announced their sexual identity after being elected, but he was the first elected to Congress with that fact clearly known. And he asked the general what his views were of don't ask, don't tell, whether or not it should be repealed or revisited. And he said, yes, I do believe it should be revisited. And we know where all of that has led. So it was a remarkable moment, I think, for those of us who were on that trip. General Odierno's awards and decorations include 4 Defense Distinguished Service Medals, 2 Army Distinguished Service Medals, the Defense Superior Service Medal, 6 Legions of Merit, and the Bronze Star Medal, to name just a few. He has made a particular commitment to working with the Armed Services Committee to address the alarming incidents of sexual assault in the military, going so far as to graciously invite me and several of my colleagues to his home for a discussion, a very serious evening of discussion on this issue. I'm grateful that he has taken this issue so seriously, and I look forward to working with him in the future. And I appreciate very much his taking the time out of his very busy day to be here with all of us to talk to us. And you can see, General, you helped me bring a huge group from the 5th District of Massachusetts. So with that, General Raymond Odierno.
Well, it's great to be here. Having grown up in the Northeast and a little bit further south in New Jersey, I understand the Northeast very well. And when I was a young boy, we used to spend a few summers up in Cape Cod, so we used to head up there all the time. So it was great. I have great memories of Massachusetts, actually, in my childhood. So good morning. It's a real honor for me to be able to come here and have the opportunity to talk with you today. It's really wonderful to see such a great turnout. And I understand this might be the final district day, because I guess the district might change, but it's great to see that the district has come together to talk about many of the important issues that face us as a nation. And so it's really heartening to see so many people who are willing to come out and have these discussions. I think that's important, and that's what makes our country so strong. I want a special thanks to Representative Nikki Tsongas, who invited me here to speak. You're such a strong advocate and supporter of our soldiers. I appreciate that very much. She cares about the welfare of our men and women in uniform. She cares about that we have the right mix for national defense, and her dedication to that has been quite astonishing. And I also appreciate the fact that she has been willing to travel to Iraq and several times in Afghanistan as well, to make sure that she understands and gets a feel for what is going on in our men and women. There's nothing more important than as our representatives of our government get over there and really get a feel for it. Because we do depend on them. They are the ones who help us to make sure that we have the resources necessary. So it's important when they want to get over there and really get a chance to sit down with our war fighters and our leaders over there to get a real feel for them. And I also want to appreciate her strong advocacy for our families. We talk a lot about our soldiers, but a key piece of the Army is our families. A lot of self-sacrifice for our families, and they are the unsung heroes in many cases, having to stay behind and take care of families as their loved ones are forward. And Congresswoman Tsongas has been a great representative of them as well. So I want to thank you for your commitment and your support in many ways. I also want to thank Brigadier General John McGinnis, who's up in Natick. I want to thank you and your team for the great efforts and contributions you're making up there. And I didn't realize that he was talking to me when we came in, that he's the first active duty general we've had up in Massachusetts in 10 years. We got to make sure that doesn't happen again. So I'll make sure we keep that moving forward. Again, I want to welcome you this morning as loyal supporters of Massachusetts. You have stood committed and steadfast by our soldiers and families. Massachusetts, by the way, is second in our country behind only California for the amount of research and development project the military gives to small businesses. And so the return investment has resulted in us saving costs, saving time, and most importantly, saving lives is the great work that's been done up in Massachusetts. So thank you on behalf of all our men and women in uniform for the work that you do in those areas. In 1 month, we'll celebrate the 237th birthday of our Army. But actually, the history of our Army dates back much further than that. When the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth in 1620, when Captain Miles Standish organized a militia that bred what today is the oldest units in our U.S. Army. And 4 of our oldest combat regiments in the Army, our nation's first, serve in the Massachusetts National Guard. The 101st Engineers, the 181st Infantry, and the 182nd Infantry Regiment, and the 101st Field Artillery. So your own citizen soldiers have a lineage that dates back through many, many generations and is the basis of our current armed forces. And I think you should be very proud of that. Your state's well-trained militia fired the first shot around the world that started the American Revolution in 1775. Since then, Massachusetts soldiers have fought in every American war, including a decisive role in World War II's Battle of the Bulge. And now our all-volunteer Army has grown to 1.1 million soldiers, 278,000 DA civilians that supports over 1.4 military family members and is well represented by the young men and women in the state of Massachusetts. These men and women have continued to answer the call throughout recent deployments to complete our mission in Iraq and continue our efforts in Afghanistan. Today we have 92,000 soldiers deployed, 68,000 in Afghanistan and 24,000 in other places around the Middle East. And I often talk about this, that we don't forget about that. And sometimes we kind of forget about the fact that we have that many soldiers deployed today to ensure our security and our liberty back here at home. We also have about 94,000 soldiers forward stationed in about 150 countries around the world. That's a pretty big footprint for our Army. In order to sustain our training and readiness efforts while facing an uncertain future, we rely on your continued support and that of surrounding military communities, local businesses, and civic and governmental leaders. Fort Devens, Natick Army Soldier Systems Center, Camp Edwards, and Camp Curtis Guild are just a few of the premier installations that provide specialized quality training to prepare our Army soldiers, civilians, and defense contractors for missions around the globe. Fort Devens alone supports over 40,000 soldiers and civilians annually, to include training the Massachusetts Army Reserve each year. Great efforts are underway at Fort Devens, which is the forefront of innovation to drive Army efforts using more affordable, efficient methods. The Base Camp Systems Integration Lab that opened last summer has made huge strides in efforts to promote energy and water efficiency for our forward deployed operations. And I can't tell you how important this is. One of the major costs that we have is the cost of fuel and water forward. And this system will gain us great efficiencies as we have forces deployed forward in order to reduce the cost, but while providing quality products in fuel and water efficiency for our soldiers. Fort Devens and Natick are vital not just to your local and state economy, but in providing support to the entire armed forces. I want to also talk about what I believe is the Army remains a great opportunity for our youth to serve their nation and learn to lead in what I consider to be America's greatest institution. As tested leaders, our soldiers know the importance of accountability, responsibility, and personal integrity. Over the last several months, I've had a chance to go around the Army, and it's incredible the young men and women I get to meet. Over the last 2 months alone, I've had a chance to issue a Distinguished Service Cross to a young sergeant. Distinguished Service Cross is the second highest award that we award for valor. 22-year-old sergeant, high school graduate who came in the Army probably without much direction, who has found the importance of team, the importance of moral and ethical values, the importance of selfless service, and who ends up being a hero on the battlefield. I had the opportunity last month to give a Silver Star to a young corporal who, again, represents all of those great qualities that we want out of our young men and women. And so I know sometimes people are concerned as they have a son or daughter who wants to join the armed force, specifically the Army, because some of the things we're asked to do are difficult. But I'm telling you, out of the 1.1 million that serve in our Army, both in the active and reserve and National Guard, we have the capability to develop them as individuals. We can provide them opportunities. We can provide them educational opportunities. We can provide them opportunities to get skills. We can provide them the leadership capabilities that allow them to go on and lead. I could sit here and list hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of names who started out serving in the Army who are now CEOs of major corporations around the United States. And when you talk to them, they will tell you they learned all their leadership skills in the Army. And in fact, the current CEO of Mercedes-Benz is a West Point graduate of 1986. And he'll tell you he doesn't have an MBA, he doesn't have any business background. He'll tell you the reason he's the CEO of Mercedes-Benz is because of his experience in the Army, his experience of having to deal with complex, difficult problems, his experience of managing personnel, his experience of managing budgets that have allowed him to lead now in the civilian world. So people come in the Army, it's just not about being in the Army, it's about developing future young men and women who can lead us in the local districts, in our states, and for the country. And so I ask you to continue not to close that door, and to ensure that our young men and women know that there's a great opportunity for them. We always talk about the importance of duty, and that duty comes first. And what we've learned is that doesn't change when somebody who's been in this uniform takes off their uniform. And that becomes definitive of their personal character. Soldiers do not quit, no matter how hard their mission is or how much they have to sacrifice. And you can always count on them to get the job done. And they're willing to raise their hand for something greater than themselves. They raise their hand to say, I volunteer to support the Constitution of the United States. That I'm willing to serve, that I'm willing to sacrifice in order to really sustain what we have. And I've had the opportunity to be in many, many different parts of the world. And the one thing I realize as I travel around, no matter where it is in the world, is how fortunate I am to be an American. How fortunate we are in the freedoms that we have, in the liberties that we have, and in the opportunities that we have. And those, I know you hear those words a lot, but I'm telling you those are not empty. When you get out there and you get to live, and you get to see the people of other countries, you realize how fortunate that we are. And that's probably been one of the biggest impressions I've had in the long time I've served in the Army, the fact that I've had a chance to see many other countries, and I feel how fortunate I am that I was born in the United States. And I've been able to have the opportunities that I have in the United States, so I thank you for that. I think it's incredibly important to me to have communities like the 5th District dedicated to ensuring that we can do everything possible to try to keep this country safe. Thank you for being a devoted partner in the lives of these men and women who do so much, who are willing to give it all for their country like so many have. Your Massachusetts motto says it all. By the sword we seek peace, by peace only under liberty. This liberty and peace can only be found as long as our soldiers who actually guard the gates of freedom around the world today are taking care of themselves. In 1775, even before our nation was formed, the people placed a special trust and confidence in its army. And all the points of its existence through the last 237 years, the Army and the nation has kept its promises with the American people. Most importantly, we will continue to fight for our America that will always be governed of, by, and for all the people of the United States. And the last thing I want to leave you with is, sometimes people ask me, and there are some people who believe that when you wear a uniform, you want to be in a war. You think that's the ultimate. I will tell you, once you've been in a war, you never want to go to a war again. Because you see the destruction, you see the chaos, you see the sacrifice that goes on. But we're willing to do it because we believe it's important to sacrifice and to provide the right security so we can live the way we do. So I want to thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you today. And I'll just leave you with the strength of our nation is our Army. The strength of our Army is our soldiers. The strength of our soldiers is our families, and that's what makes us Army strong. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk to you. I'll be happy to take a few questions. If anybody has about anything at all, I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Please, don't be afraid to ask. Yes, sir.
General, could you speak about sequestration and what that might mean to the readiness of the Army and our armed forces?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with this. I don't know if you've had a conversation about it, but what we've done is, as we've gone through the latest budget submissions, the Department of Defense has taken a $487 billion cut. We think It's a difficult cut, but it's one we think we can do in order to provide, we understand the issue of the debt with the national security. And so we are working through now a $487 billion reduction in the defense budget. We have worked very hard to ensure that we have a plan that allows us to go forward and still sustain our security. But what's concerning to us is if we don't get some agreement here by the end of the year, sequestration will take effect, and that will be an additional $500 billion cut to the Defense Department. And we believe this could be devastating to us. We're already reducing the Army by about 80,000 soldiers. This would require us to reduce it by another 80 to 100,000 soldiers. It would affect our modernization programs. It would affect our readiness. And I believe it would cause us to completely rethink how we provide defense for our nation. And so we believe it's something that's very critical, and we hope that we'll be able to come to some resolution that allows us to avoid sequestration. I will tell you that in the Department of Defense and the Army as part of that, we want to be part of the solution of this debt crisis, this fiscal crisis that we have in the country. And I think we've started to do this by this $487 billion cut that we're absorbing. We understand the importance, and we've talked about the underpinning of our economy is one of the most important things to our strength of our nation, and we all understand that. And we want to be part of this, but we have to be careful that we don't make unwise choices. And I think the execution of sequestration will be an unwise choice, in my opinion. Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Okay, you let me off the hook. I appreciate that very much. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Well, we also, the timing, the schedule is going along here very smoothly here, and our second speaker has arrived. I think most of you know him. He is my predecessor, my very distinguished predecessor, who set a standard that we all know was hard to beat, and is doing the same as Chancellor at the University, UMass Lowell, an institution that is so fortunate to have him as its leader. For anybody who spends any amount of time in Lowell, I think you can see an almost daily output, physical output at the university, but also when you meet the students, you just see how thrilled they are to be there, how they're so impressed by the way in which the university is moving ahead, and they're also having a great experience, both professionally, educationally, but also personally with the other students that they're in school with. Just this last week, I went to a conference that the university hosted, a nanotech conference, to highlight again how the university is in the cutting edge of this nanotech, of the world of nanotech, which has a potential really to be a tremendous economic opportunity for this country going forward, a revolutionary opportunity. And so to see the university take this opportunity so seriously is tremendous. Marty actually is the second chancellor of the University of Massachusetts in Lowell and the 14th leader of the institution, which was founded in the 1890s as the Lowell Normal and Lowell Textile Schools. He was the first, so that's on the university side. As a member of Congress, what I think is so telling, and as we just talked about Don't Ask, Don't Tell with General Odierno, who I told the story, Marty, of how meeting him in Iraq, where Jared Polis, an openly gay member of Congress, asked him about repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He said, I think it's time we did it. That was in 2009. So a very progressive general. But Marty was the first member to introduce a piece of legislation to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 1993, soon after, if not almost immediately after being elected to Congress. Extraordinary leadership on this issue that Marty has demonstrated. And the other thing I learned when I got to Congress, someone said to me, is you have to accept how long it takes to bring about change. So it was only this last year that the repeal finally took place. But I think former Congressman Meehan, Chancellor Meehan, deserves tremendous credit for the effort and the leadership he demonstrated on this issue. He established a national reputation as well for his leadership in reforming campaign finance laws and protecting people against the health risks in tobacco. This is our final 5th District Day. It's not inappropriate that the gentleman who started 5th District Day should be here as we have our 18th 5th District Day. And with that, I'd like to welcome Chancellor Marty Meehan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nikki. I'm delighted to be here, and to hear Nikki talk about it. It was my first amendment on the floor of the House, and like Nikki, I'd been appointed to the Armed Services Committee, and a lot of folks felt that I would be the appropriate person to submit that amendment, which at the time was opposition to a compromise that the Clinton administration had reached with the military. So this wasn't a Democratic-Republican issue, and in fact, it was opposing what the Clinton administration had negotiated. And if you remember, Bill Clinton had run for president saying he's going to lift the ban on gays serving in the military. But it was interesting because I'm a freshman member of Congress, and I have a district, as Nikki knows, that has some conservative parts, a couple of pretty conservative newspapers in Lawrence and Lowell. And then there's a Globe, and that's a little different. And so I introduced this amendment, and it was a headline of the Lawrence paper, the headline of the Lowell paper, and the Globe had a little tiny piece down here, barely paying attention. And my father said to me, I come from a working class family, my father said to me, does this really have to be your first amendment that you offer on the floor? And I said to him, Dad, yeah, there's a point in time when you have jobs like this where you have a chance to make a statement, and my moment is now, and yes, I have to do this. And what is interesting is over the years, the public was way ahead of the politicians on this. Literally, I would talk to Mary Bono, a Republican from Orange County, and I'd say, why can't you get on this bill? We need to get some Republicans. And she said, Marty, and I'd get killed back home. I said, you got to check and poll, because the American people are way ahead of where the politicians in Washington are on this issue. So you're right, Nikki, things take a long time, and one of the things, the only thing I think that I regretted was leaving Congress not having had that ban lifted, and it's a great thing for the country, and I was proud of, in fact, President Obama sent me a copy of the signed bill that I have hanging up in my office. But I'm delighted to be here. I thought maybe I'd talk a little bit about 5th District Day and how it all